Today we're talking America's news overload, dropout rates at CMS, and love and babies. I'm Carlton Hargrove, and this is 282. Thank you for joining us for another episode of 282. Once again, we've got a great conversation planned, and we've also got another great group of panelists here. We'll get to them in a second, but before I do, I want to just say what's up to 282 producer Jarvis Holiday, who we have perched in what I call the Eagle's Nest. What's up, Jarvis?
Hey, Carlton. Thanks. We're hoping the viewers will follow us on Twitter at 282TV, and if you find some of the topics engaging, then comment using hashtag 282TV, and we'll incorporate some of them into the show.
Thank you, Jarvis. From the Eagle's Nest, Jarvis. Yeah, we've got a great group of guests. We're going to introduce everybody. First up on the end, we've got Bill Anderson, who is the executive director of Mech Ed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. We've also got Shamika Rhymes in the middle, and she is a local blogger. She actually writes a lot about love and relationships and kind of love and relationships going wrong most of the time, it seems like. And we've also got Mark Washburn, who is a reporter and columnist, longtime reporter and columnist for the Charlotte Observer. Thank you very much for joining us, folks. Appreciate that. So first up, let's just jump right into the first topic is America's news overload. Now, anybody that works in the media like you and Shamika know that in the last few years we've had a proliferation, I can't even say the word, of media and news, especially online. We've had a little TV, but online has really exploded to the point where there's like dozens and maybe hundreds of blogs, blogs, web news sites, Twitter stuff. Shamika, you're on Twitter all the time reporting some kind of news of one or the other. But the question is, with so much news out there, does that mean that we are doing a disservice to the audience that we're actually trying to serve? Mark, you write every single second of the day, it seems like. What do you think?
May seem like that to you, but mostly I'm sleeping or something. Yeah, it's funny, when Facebook and all these came along, I thought, oh, this will be kind of like nonsense, but popcorn nonsense. But, I find people get a lot of their news off of social network sites, and I've come to believe that it's a good thing. I think people are more interested in news, and they certainly have an opportunity to pick the news they like, not only about who's having a baby and who's in a relationship these days, but when Whitney Houston died, I would imagine most people learned about it not from the traditional media, television, radio, but probably over Twitter or over Facebook. And I think that tends to drive people to, what I would call the reported sources, the actual news providers who take the time to report things and are professionally adept at it.
Right.
I think this is really a good thing. I don't think we've ever been quite as quick with information as we are now. It's certainly moving at the speed of electrons. Of course, the flip side of that is you're also eager to stumble sometimes,
right?
And you've seen a number of mess ups along those lines, and people just go too fast and ain't right.
Well, on that subject, Shamika, since you're on Twitter a lot and you're always tweeting out one thing or another, the question is, when you put out a story, now we sort of, instead of trying to get it right the first time, we're actually seem like we're correcting things on the back end. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? What if a person ever comes back for the second tweet?
Well, I think the problem is people just jump the gun, and I've seen that so many times. Even because I even questioned it when Whitney Houston died. That's where I saw it first, Twitter, and so my first thing was, are they killing somebody else off? Because Twitter is known for that.
Right.
You think, okay, well, this person's probably not really dead, so let me go check these other sites. And then it just seems like a lot of times that the biggest issue is people don't confirm first with confirm it for themselves before they tweet it.
Well, along those lines, a few hours after they reported Whitney Houston was dead, there was a rumor going around that Keanu Reeves died in some kind of surfing accident. And so people were Facebooking and tweeting that out, and then everybody had to, basically let them know that was a hoax. And then that was a kind of a more fluffy case, but I mean, this happens with real stories too. Speaking of real stories, there's a lot of stuff going on locally. And with a lot of this news proliferation that we're getting, it's national news. And a lot of the local issues, local coverage, at least based on all the stuff that I can find, is going down, is not increasing to the same amount that national sites, like the Huffington Post, they're launching some big television network. That's going to be more nationally focused. But what happens to local issues? I mean, Bill, with MEC-Ed, you guys deal with CMS. Do you think that the fact that we're chasing all these big national stories does a disservice to local issues like CMS?
I don't think that it does. I think that we have to accept the fact that people are getting their news in very different ways. I mean, I remember as a kid and as a teen growing up, there were 3 channels, and that was it.
Right.
And now the proliferation of all the cable channels, but also the iPad and the iPhones have changed everything. Everybody has all these different apps. So people are constantly looking at whatever app or whatever Twitter feed. I'm an example of someone who's really had to change with the times. A year ago, I didn't tweet. I thought Twitter was kind of silly, and now I use it all the time.
You don't think it's silly anymore?
Not at all. Absolutely no.
It can be a little silly.
I think that it's information overload,
Right.
but you can go through and see what you're interested in and pick up on that, and we use it all the time, and we have really increased our followers, so we're able to provide the correct information. So I think people are much more choosy about what they're going to pay attention to, but there are just so many options out there.
Well, that's interesting what you just said. Here's MEC-Ed. In the past, they would have to go through something like The Observer to get a story out
Right.
there. Now they can go directly to people who are interested in those issues and tell them a story on their own. What does this mean for people that, like ourselves, that actually write news stories and cover those issues? Does that muddy the waters at all? I'm asking you, Mark.
Well, I think that there's always going to be a need for people, to verify the information, to have some expertise in the information. I think a lot of what you see on the internet are people reacting to verified information. Here's what I think about it, and you see this on Twitter too. I think I'll have a peach. I'm that important. People want to know. So I think there'll always be a need for real information. Now, the question is, what's the economic model? Can you get somebody to underwrite that sort of thing? And it's getting tougher and tougher these days, because if I'm an advertiser, well, why wouldn't I put my ad on Facebook or Huffington Post if I'm looking for a certain segment of the population,
Right.
rather than one of the television news sites or something else? So I think that's going to be the big question as time goes on. But on the other hand, I think just as far as information reaching people, the things have never been better.
Right. Well, I think Jarvis said, I like that hat, Jarvis. Jarvis Holiday in the Eagle's Nest has some information for us. What's up, Jarvis?
Yes. Well,
What's going on with that hat, number one?
I'm a journalist, traditional
That's
journalist.
right. Press. Okay.
The press card
I didn't see that.
indicates that. But one of our followers, Adam Butler, at Adam Butler TV, in response to our question, why do people seem less informed when there's more news out there? He says because people are too lazy to do any work to inform themselves. Same reason people are overweight, laziness. And then coincidentally, this past week, News Net Check, which is a site that's dedicated to covering digital media, actually analyzed, the headline of the article was Charlotte Media Diverge on Social Strategy. And it analyzed how the Charlotte Observer, WCNC, WBTV, all the major news networks and publications in the area are increasing their social media and how they're hoping to make money off of it. So anyone wants to check out, just go to newsnetcheck.com.
Thank you, Jarvis. Thank you very much from the Eagle's Nest. I like that hat. Talking about the business thing, talking about strategies, the hyperlocal, it seems like every year, the journalism world is overrun with the hot thing. A few years ago it was aggregation. Now it was hyperlocal. I don't really, what is it now? I don't know what's being pushed right now.
Well, I think everybody wants to reach out and get their product out there and say, hey, come to us for the information.
Okay.
We know this, we know that. And there's a lot of experimentation going on. And, I look at the whole industry and I go, 10 years ago, the great thing was AOL. Wow, if we could just be AOL, that would be fantastic. And then, of course, now it's, gosh, Facebook, that's going to,
Right.
Offer $6 billion salary or market cap if it comes out, whatever. And I've always thought on a lot of these sites, it's kind of like MySpace when Fox bought MySpace. You know, they would look at it and they would see like these telegraph lines by the railroad tracks, and they'd see a bunch of birds on there, and they'd go, if we buy that wire, you know, we get all those birds. Well, the problem is birds fly.
Right.
So that's what's happened with MySpace. That's what's happened with AOL. And that'll probably happen with Facebook at some time, particularly if geezers like you keep getting on there.
Hey.
And, you know, what's next? What's next? It's always the next big thing. Twitter, oh, everybody loves Twitter right now. How much longer is that going to last? So I think there's a cycle here. Traditional media, television, radio, newspapers have been around a long, long time. And they're all pretty aggressive about staying in this game. There's this giant myth that the news business is going away, that it's sinking into the Atlantic. Not happening. In fact, newspapers who, you know, lead the league in the petrified news community actually have more people coming to them now than ever before. They have a larger audience than they've ever had because they can reach so much more, they can move so much faster. Newspapers are the best poised, I think, because they've got the space, the time, the people who have expertise in these things. Television isn't far behind. They have, you know, this beauty of video and things like that. And then when you look at Huffington Post and these others, well, they do offer perspective, but they don't offer the kinds of things that people, you know, in their bones want to know. You know, when did it happen? What happened? You know, were there drugs in Whitney's room? And you can speculate on that all you want, but what you really want to know is what happened. And that's where these people go. So I actually see a bright future. It's uncertain right now. It's still shaking out, but I see a pretty bright future for traditional media that are with it and moving along. And I think, you know, it's all going to come electronically. What a great thing. The internet has, you know, endless space on it, endless time on it, and you can just keep pouring stuff in there all the time, and people will come to it.
Well, Shamika, one last question about this subject. Since you really are at the forefront of applications like Twitter and things like that, what do you think is the next thing? Is Google Plus, has that gained enough steam? I mean, what's the next social media application that will help us deliver information effectively?
You know, honestly, I haven't even been on Google Plus. I've gotten the invitations to join, but I'm like, I'm already on like sensory overload with Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you know, all those things, and trying to keep up with my blog and do some other writing. So, but I really think that there's probably, I think Twitter is probably going to be around for a bit.
Okay.
I really do. Because even, you know, kind of going back to how people get their news, a lot of times publicists, you know, just even like sheriff's departments, whatever, those type of organizations tweet their press releases now. So, you know, a lot of times you can, if you're following them, then obviously then that stuff is confirmed because they tweeted it.
Okay.
So I really think that Twitter is probably going to stay around for a while.
All right. Well, cool. Well, let's switch gears. We've talked enough about the news overload. We've been overloaded by the conversation. So let's talk about CMS. And I'm glad we have Bill here to talk about that. Last week, a state report came out saying that dropout rates and rates of violence have gone down significantly at CMS. It also, focusing on the dropout rates, it said that the dropout rates were at a 6-year low. And, you know, we were just talking about this before the show came on. There's a sort of perception that CMS is a very troubled system. But when we're constantly getting news about awards they've won and this latest stuff about the violence and dropout rates going down, what do you make of the report?
I think that the dropout rate picture is often kind of cloudy, and dropout rate, in my opinion, isn't nearly as important as the graduation rate numbers.
Okay.
Graduation rate numbers are measuring cohorts of students, how many students start in the 9th grade and 4 years later actually graduate. That's really the number that we need to keep our eye on.
Okay.
And CMS has been showing improvement. It was at 60% 5 or 6 years ago, and now it's at almost 75%. But if you dig a little bit deeper into the numbers, and that means that 75% of all the kids that started 9th grade actually graduated 4 years later.
Okay.
That's for the whole system. But you have schools like Ardrey-Kell High School that have a 93% cohort graduation rate, and then you have schools like West Charlotte that are still at 51%. So there's a real difference between schools. So when you just look at average numbers, I don't think that's enough. You need to dig down a little bit. I think the school violence numbers have come down in some areas, but gone up a little bit in others. We've gone to a number of K-8 schools where we haven't had those. We closed those schools in West Charlotte last year. Well, not all West Charlotte, but mostly West Charlotte. Very challenging issue, very contentious issue. And at some of those K-8 schools, violence rates have actually gone up a little bit. But I think that's because you have elementary school principals who have a little different perception of how a school should be run versus maybe some middle school folks.
Well, I mean, all that being said, do we really have the wrong idea about CMS, or is it just a more complicated issue than anybody really wants to say?
I think that we do. I think it's very easy to bash CMS, and I think it's unfortunate. In some of my travels and in some of my professional relationships with people in other places, CMS is viewed as a very strong school district for a lot of reasons. And if you want to look just at data, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, we continue to trend upward with student achievement, with closing the achievement gap. So we are having some successes, but it's, the business of public education is very complex. It's very tough, and it's been made much more difficult the last few years with some pretty significant reductions in funds.
Well, Mark, from your perspective as a journalist, what do you make of the good news at CMS as opposed to the bad news?
Yeah, CMS is, I've always said this, CMS has a huge public relations problem that it's not been able to get around. And there is a lot of good news at CMS. They are doing a lot of good things. Of course, right now they're a bit without a sale because they're between superintendents, and that'll change. I think that what has to happen is CMS just needs to continue working toward excellence as it's tried to do for a long time. There are always ideas. Let's split the county into 3 districts. That always has some appeal. Let's do this. Let's do that. But I think in general, CMS does a remarkable job for an urban school district of its size, particularly with the numbers of people who English is a second language and other things. It's a remarkably complex situation they're in. And when you really look at CMS versus some other urban school districts, particularly in the South, CMS is not that bad.
Yeah.
CMS is doing remarkably well in some cases.
Okay.
Can I add to one thing that Mark just said? He talked about communications and public relations. 4 years ago, I think CMS had 28 staffers in their public information office, and this is a $1 billion organization. They now have 7.
Oh, boy.
And that's part of the budget reductions. It's really tough for them to get out in front of some of these good stories just because of staffing and budget cuts.
So is this a messaging issue, or is it an issue of performance or assessment? Because that was a question too. Is like, are we really truly assessing these rates in a proper way, like dropout rates? You were just saying that if you dig deeper in the numbers, maybe there's some wiggle room here and there.
The state requires you to keep graduation cohort rates and dropout numbers.
Okay.
So you're required to keep both.
Okay.
And I guess what I was trying to share with you is that I think the number that's the most important is measuring that graduation cohort rate.
Okay.
How many kids start the 9th grade and actually finish 4 years later.
Okay. Jarvis, you have something?
Yes, and actually in an article that was published Thursday in the Charlotte Observer cited that violence is down in CMS, as well as the dropout rate. The dropout rate currently is 3.57%, and that's down from 6.39% just 4 years earlier. So it's the lowest dropout record since the 2004 school year. But at the same time, while this is data that CMS has published, it comes, just a few weeks after the Observer questioned statistics that CMS that released, saying that 99% of their elementary and middle school students were on pace to graduate. And of course, that number ended up being erroneous. The revised number said it was 68% and 74%. And subsequently, the chief of who oversees the statistics for CMS resigned.
Well, Bill, what do you make of that? I mean, those are really big differences in numbers. 99%, 70-something percent.
I think what he said is exactly the truth. That's what happened. There were some numbers that were reported earlier that were proven to be incorrect.
Okay.
And as a result, the gentleman who actually reported those numbers resigned his position. So there was clearly a mistake made.
Wow.
But I think CMS came right out and said we made a mistake.
Okay.
As soon as they figured it out.
Shamika, one of the things that I find kind of interesting is violence rates at CMS are down, but violence against staff is up. And at least that's what the Observer story said. And I don't know, if you have kids or have friends with kids in schools, but do they get the idea that CMS is a less dangerous place for students and more for teachers?
I have friends that actually teach, and I've never heard them say anything about students being violent.
Yeah.
I volunteered for a little bit at one of the high schools.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you, I was scared. Just some of those kids looked scary. And then I learned that some of them were like 21, 22 years old also.
Wow.
So, and I don't know, I guess that would explain why they had an influx of security there at the school,
Right.
that particular school.
Okay.
Needless to say, I'm not there anymore, but
You don't work for the PR department at CMS, right?
no.
Okay.
No.
All right. No, because you're not helping them at all. But anyway, well, we can go on and on about CMS, but I do want to switch gears, and we want to talk about our last subject, which is actually love and babies. I think now Valentine's Day is coming up tomorrow, and it's a special time for people who are in love and have, girlfriends, boyfriends, and things like that. But a lot of people are putting off getting in relationships these days, especially women. I mean, they're waiting longer to get married and be in long-term relationships. And then it comes up where they're in a situation where they may not be able to have kids or as many kids as they would like because they waited so long. And Shamika, since you write about love so much, I really wanted to get your comment on that. Are people kind of messing themselves up when they wait so long to have these long-term relationships?
I like how you put that on women, that we're the ones waiting.
Well, I said mostly. I didn't say all of them.
Honestly, you know what I think it is? Because, and I'm single as well, and the problem, and I think I told you this before, is people just don't know how to date.
Okay.
So that's the issue.
So
right
what do you
there.
mean right there? What do you mean people don't know how to date?
I have to kind of watch what I want to say. People
Oh,
have to
boy.
follow me on Twitter for the the down and dirty part of
Okay.
it.
All right,
But
your numbers just went way up.
This is
How
a
down and
censored
dirty.
version.
right, the censored version of
Okay.
it is they basically think that courting consists of, hey, my name is, and then it goes straight to the bedroom. There's no in between. Let's get to know each other.
That's a big leap.
Right, exactly. That's the problem.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of us women now are just like, you know what? I'd rather be single and just do what I have to do and not have to deal with this. But then,
But what does that mean for people? I have a friend who is now wanting to have kids, and she's sort of faced with some medical realities that she's going to have a problem having the size of the family that she wanted to. And there's some guys out there who are facing the same thing, especially now they're finding links between autism and older men. But what about that though? I mean, you put it off is there a cutoff line? I mean, everybody's different, but
right. I actually have a friend that she got to a point where she just kind of said, you know what? I'm not, it doesn't seem like I'm going to meet anybody, and I want kids, so I'm just going to do it.
Right.
So that's what she did. But now the problem is she's kind of like, okay, well, I need help, but there's still nobody around, as far as dating.
So she actually had a child?
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, she's glad she went ahead and did it, but there's that reality of, okay, now I have to raise this child by myself.
Right. Right.
And as far as the men and women that you mentioned that maybe wait and find out they can't have kids or can't have as many, should probably, I mean, there's plenty of kids out there to adopt.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, though, for whatever reason, want to go through the wonders of childbirth. I don't know, Mark, Bill, if you guys have kids or are married or whatever, and I don't know if this was an issue for you when you were at that point. Bill?
I've been married 28 years. I have 2 grown children, and I want to comment a little bit on what Shamika said about people not understanding about dating.
Okay.
I think there's a real challenge in our society that everybody wants instant gratification, that everything needs to come immediately. I want it now. I think kids today get a lot of mixed messages that you don't have to really work hard for things, and you do have to work hard for things. dating is another example. Relationships, they're not always easy, but we all want this instant gratification. We get bombarded with these messages that, hey, everything's nice and easy, and it isn't. So I think that's part of the problem, too.
I think, too, there's a lot more opportunities for people now. Now, when Bill was young in the pool,
ago.
marriage was a destination. That was where you were headed for most people.
Yeah.
And people spend, I think, an inordinate amount of time, finding the right mate. But now, you don't. Marriage is boring, right? I mean, there's lots of fish out
answer
there,
that
right?
Yeah. I think Jarvis has some tweets on this subject.
Yes, we asked our followers why are people staying single longer, getting married later in life. At Letters to Betsy says she's keeping her options open, and at LB Stewart said seeing how others get bored in routine, fears of going there.
That's just what you talked about. You said it's boring. Well, I
didn't say it was boring. I said people think it's
people
boring.
think it's boring. You think it's exciting. Yes, people think it's boring. Well, Valentine's Day is tomorrow. I hope people can kind of, sort this out before they get thrown out of the house or lose their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to go into what I call the lightning round. We're going to ask, what is the most unreported or underreported story of last week? Mark, I'm going to start with you just because, this is what you do. So
Underreported story. Wow. I think there was a lot of boring stuff last week. Nothing really jumps to mind. I think the most overreported would have been Whitney. Just every minute of every day. I'm sorry, but you watch TV on Saturday night. It was a one-fact story that everybody could do 2 hours on.
Right.
So I would have to go that way.
Okay.
But underreported, I don't know. What do you got?
Overreported, that works. Shamika?
Overreported, I'd have to say Jay-Z and Beyonce's baby. I mean, everybody has babies. I don't know what makes Blue
There's
Ivy
only
so
one
special.
Blue Ivy. Bill?
That's my vote.
I think the most underreported story is what's going on in Syria. I mean, what's going on in Syria is terrible.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's not receiving near the recognition it needs.
Well, hopefully that situation does not escalate in a negative way where we have to sort of get involved physically. I hope that we can work something out, Anyway, thank you folks for joining us once again for 282. Thank you, Jarvis, for all that information and tweets. And you can hit us up at Twitter, 282TV. I'm Carlton Hargrove. Thanks a lot. See you next week.